Welcome back, and we're going to work on the last couple of lessons now when it comes to the moon landings. And now we're going to get on to the really interesting part if you're kind of a scientific mind. We go to page 290, we're going to look at landing on the moon and returning safely. That is the phrase that Kennedy used in that speech back in 1961 about the importance of getting to the moon, yes, but of returning safely. And that's why this costs so much money. Think of all the Gemini missions, of the Mercury missions, all the Apollo missions to get this far, to make sure that the people who actually went to the moon could actually return afterwards. So, charting the course of the moon landing in 1969, it's important to show the technological success, which is what we can see of all the rocket technology and all of the kind of the technology designed to keep the people alive in space, and again the technology needed to actually keep the people alive, not just in the capsule but out in the coldness of space and on the moon surface itself. Even the radiation could kill you. You could if the heat if you're in the sun, the cold temperatures if you're in the shade. It's crazy to think about the temperature shift when you're on the moon as well. So that's important. We look at the technological success, but the other thing is the daring of it all. Think about the people who put their lives on the line to be able to go on these missions, knowing that the slightest mistake, whether it's a mistake in calculation, whether it's a mistake in manufacturing, could mean that they're going to die in space. And that's a horrific thought that they have to push out of their minds. And one thing I recommend listening to is the actual landing itself. You can find it on YouTube, and just how calm the astronauts were, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, as they landed on the moon, which I'll talk a little bit about when we get that far. So, Neil Armstrong has chosen to command the mission. Now, this is interesting because he was a part of the Gemini missions. Buzz Aldrin, he's second in command in case anything goes wrong, plus to help out with Neil Armstrong while he's commanding. And his job, Neil Armstrong's job, is to land the lunar module, which is a really difficult task because once you detach from the command module, you're going to be dropping at a kind of a strange angle. You then have to level up and then land pretty much where they hope is the flattest part. So the astronauts who had went before them had been scouting out potential landing sites for the Apollo 11 astronauts to land on. But the thing is, they're up so far, you can only gauge what roughly looks flat. As the Apollo 11 astronauts were landing, they were noticing far more craters than they'd seen previously. So they were running out of fuel as they were trying to find a better and better spot to land. If they ran out of fuel, they would have been stuck on the moon and wouldn't have been able to get back out. I think they had 30 seconds left of fuel left when it was actually landing. And to hear just the calm voices as they're speaking, as they're doing this, it's crazy to actually understand because their lives are on the line at that point. So Buzz Aldrin's second in command, his job is also to step on the moon with Armstrong. Armstrong will be the first to step on the moon, and then you'd have Aldrin would be second. Michael Collins, that's the third person. His job, you're in charge of the lunar orbiter. Now, this is a really important job because it's your job to be able to be in the right place at the right time to reconnect with the lander after kind of the part of the lander that's going to burst back up into space. This is the Eagle. And this is really, you probably heard that phrase, the Eagle has landed. That's what they're talking about. That's the lander. And there's a part that's going to burst back up. It has thrusters at the bottom of it to get back up into the moon's orbit. Remember, the moon's gravity is only a sixth of the Earth's gravity. So it's not nearly as heavy. So you won't need as much thrust to get back up into orbit. So the Apollo missions Apollo 11 starts on the 16th of July 1969. When you go up into space, the first thing you need to do is you need to orbit the Earth a couple of times to pick up speed, yes, but to also get the right angle to aim at the moon. If you overshoot the moon or undershoot the moon, you're going off in the wrong direction. There's very little chance of saving because there's only a certain amount of fuel on the command module that's actually going to be going to the moon. So we have to plan that perfectly. So that's going to head off. Then you set off on a 4-day journey to the moon. Sometimes when you look up into the sky, you don't really realize just how far away the moon is. If somebody described it to me before, that if you have something the size of a beach ball in your hand, the moon is about the size of a tennis ball and it's about 1.5 kilometers away, which is strange to think that it's really that far away. I was like, yes, it's really that far away. So it does take quite a lot of time to get there, and they have to keep the moon in their sights all the way through. And they have this, like, they can correct their course slight bits all the way, but you don't want to overuse any of the fuel that you need. And you have your crosshairs that you want to aim at. Remember, you don't want to aim straight at the moon. You want to orbit the moon. So you're aiming for the moon's orbit, so slightly to the side, so you get captured by it. And then you have to slow down a fair amount to actually get there, because otherwise, if you go too fast, you can get slingshotted out into space. You pick up speed and push off. And then if you're too narrow, you can get trapped by the orbit and maybe basically hit the ground. So a lot of maths involved, a lot of science involved to make sure that that doesn't happen. On the 20th of July, Armstrong and Aldrin detached from Columbia. Columbia is the command module, and they land in the Sea of Tranquility. Um, they only had a few seconds left of fuel. The reason it's called the Sea of Tranquility is that they picked different names for parts of the moon as we looked up into space and imagined what could have been there, let's say, billions of years ago. And one of them is the Sea of Tranquility here, because it looked like there was less craters there than some of the other parts of the moon. But obviously, the closer you go, the more likely you are to see craters, and there were quite a few of them. Um, Again, I recommend looking at that YouTube clip to show the actual landing of the moon. It's really interesting to see how they actually do it and how dangerous it was for these guys to actually land on it. Trying to find the right angle, trying to use the right amount of thrust, trying not to use as much fuel, trying to find a flat enough spot. So really interesting to see. Um, Over 500 million people worldwide watched the landing. Now, you can't count every person, but each station that showed it around the world tried to figure out how many people were watching at that time, and they came up with the number 500 million. It's quite a lot of people, and pretty much all of America, all of Europe is watching this. Quite a few people in Russia watching it as well. But anyone around the world had the opportunity to watch it. It was a global event where the world shut down to watch it. Um, so the two men that were on the moon, what did they do while they were there? Well, the first thing that they did was they collected rock samples, and each place that when they came back with huge amounts of rock. They left quite a lot on the moon, a lot of kind of trash they left behind because they didn't want to bring it back because it's heavy. You want to bring it up, and rocks are heavy, so you want to bring stuff with you. And you can leave stuff behind. The rocks that they brought back were used as, I don't want to say propaganda, but I can't think of a better word right now. They were gifted to a lot of America's allies, and Ireland actually got two moon rocks, and they were held in Dunsink Observatory out near Blanchardstown, near Castleknock, in Dublin. And we don't know where they are now. They think that somewhere in the dump in Dunsink, because there's a dump there as well after Dunsink Observatory caught fire. So if you ever want to go looking for some moon rocks, you know where to go. They conducted experiments on the moon. The famous one of what Galileo predicted, that if you dropped a feather and a cannonball off the Leaning Tower of Pisa, which one would hit the ground first? Well, they proved that in a pretty much an airless environment, if you drop the two of them at the same time, they would fall at the same speed. So they conducted that experiment and a few others while they were up there, before launching back to reattach with Collins's command module. Um, they spent 21 hours total. That's a long time to spend on the moon. And they couldn't really necessarily go very far. Um, Later lunar missions that went up would bring moon buggies so they could travel around a bit more. And again, anything you bring with you, you kind of have to leave there. So there's moon buggies still there on the moon. Um, so they would bring back as much as they could, as much as the soil, well, the dust that they could bring back and the rocks. They conducted their experiments, they got back on and they went up. And they successfully traveled back before splashing down in the Pacific Ocean on the 24th of July. It is a really intense 8-day mission for these three men, but it gives a victory to America when it comes to the space race. But America doesn't try to make it about them. What America does is it tries to make it a global thing, a humankind thing, because even the Russians congratulate them on their victory, or congratulate them on managing to reach the moon. And one of the things is the words that Neil Armstrong speaks. He says, "The eagle has landed when they finally reach the moon." And he says, "One small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." And you might have heard the phrase, "one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Well, man and mankind is the same thing. He was supposed to say one small step for a man. Now, he says himself that he said it, but that it wasn't picked up by the microphone. So take that for what you want. Um, but it's really interesting to consider that they wanted this as a worldwide thing, that it was the human race who managed to do this. So when they come back, one of the first things that happens is they are quarantined, because this is what would happen to pretty much a lot of the astronauts who went into space, because they don't know what they would actually bring back with them, especially after being on the moon. So they were quarantined for a certain amount of time before they could be released. Now that doesn't happen anymore, because we realize that space is a sterile atmosphere in a lot of cases, in most cases. And they've never found any life anywhere else apart from on Earth. So that's what they assume. But the idea is that this is a huge leap for all of mankind. So when they did come back after they were finished their quarantine, they traveled the world, and they were treated like heroes everywhere they went, because it was billed as, yes, the Americans did it, but at the same time, it's a world event. When they landed, they placed a plaque on the surface of the moon, and the signature of the American president at the time is on that plaque, and it's Richard Nixon, the only one ever to resign. When Nixon gave the speech that night to tell the American people how successful the mission was, he had two speeches made, one if it went really well and one if it went really badly. So again, if you go online, you can find that really badly speech, because they don't know in advance if it's going to be a success or how much of a success it's going to be. But in reality, it was a massive success and a really glorious victory for the American space program. In the next couple of lessons, we're going to look at the impact that this success would have, not just on America in terms of the Cold War and in terms of domestic policy, but also how it helped drive on um, kind of defensive and attacking technologies when it came to the military. We looked a little bit at Star Wars earlier on, but we're going to look at it and look at some other things in a bit more depth in the next couple of lessons. I'll see you for then.